Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the author of Education Nation, one of our nation's leaders in the development and use of education media, and former executive director of the George Lucas Educational Foundation, Dr. Milton Chen.
Great to be here this afternoon, and what an amazing conference this has been. Teaching and Learning 2015, I had the pleasure of going to an earlier celebration of teaching and learning in New York City, and once again, Ron Thorpe and his team at the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards and all of their partners has just done a fantastic job in bringing you knowledge meets inspiration, some great knowledge and some great inspiration. So this may be one of the last chances we'll get to thank them, but please give them a round of applause for an amazing conference celebrating teachers, their role in the classroom, and also, as we've been having some discussions over these couple days, the role of teachers as advocates, telling their principals, going forward and telling their state capitals, this is what we want. So I'm so pleased to be part of this conference, and I hope we have a very special session coming up for you today that will give you both some knowledge and some inspiration. Schools need the sort of partnerships that we've talked about a lot as part of this conference. Many of the partners that are represented here, and also some interesting partners that you'll see on stage today. Schools need filmmakers who can bring them these powerful images you've just seen to help inspire your students, to help teach in a different way. And schools also need partners that can give your students the authentic experience, the place-based experience of learning, and motivate them and inspire them in a national park. So these are the topics that we're going to be taking up today. And I feel like this first gentleman really needs no introduction with this group. When you think about his filmography, the Civil War, baseball, jazz, films about Frank Lloyd Wright, films about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, the Roosevelts more recently, and a wonderful film called The Address. I hope some of you will check it out. Boys at a school in Vermont who memorized and delivered the Gettysburg Address. And on that website, you will see not only those boys delivering this, but some of, 4 presidents delivering the Gettysburg Address, Taylor Swift, Usher, and my favorites, Elmo and Murray from Sesame Street, learning about the Gettysburg Address. So Ken Burns is one of our most distinguished filmmakers, certainly, but I would just like to, by way of introducing him, give him the highest praise I can, which is that he is also a teacher, isn't he? He is a teacher who uses the medium of film to teach us about our nation and ourselves. So joining him on stage will be, in my mind, a tremendous model of a true public servant. Someone who uses his senior position in government to make us a better nation, to make us a more perfect democracy. John Jarvis is a 37-year veteran of the National Park Service. He's been a park biologist and ranger. He's been a superintendent in North Cascades and Mount Rainier, also the regional director of our National Park Service in the Pacific West region, and now the 18th director of the National Park Service, where he oversees an agency, not just any agency, but by most surveys, America's favorite federal agency. I think you can understand why that's true, and I think you agree with that. Overseeing an agency with 22,000 employees, a budget of $3 billion, over 407 national parks, and I gather, recent data, more than 290 million visitors every year. So today, we're at the doorstep of celebrating a very important birthday. Do you know what it is? It's the 100th anniversary of the national parks in 2016. So happy birthday, National Parks, next year. And you'll be hearing a lot during the rest of 2015, moving into 16, about the Centennial of the national parks, and we'll be talking about that as well. So please welcome Ken Burns and John Jarvis. Yeah, they deserve it. I think so. Ken, let's start with you. So many of us remember the series in 2009, National Parks, also the subtitle, America's Best Idea. Where did the idea for the National Park series begin, and what was the reaction to it?
You know, we usually take several years to decide to do something. It's a thought that then moves down and becomes a feeling and an emotion, and a big yes is added to it. This was the easiest decision I ever made. I've been working for a long time with an extraordinary writer and producer named Dayton Duncan, and we had made films on the American West, on Mark Twain. We had done one on Lewis and Clark together. And when we were sort of wrapping up a trip out west where inevitably where we were shooting happened to be property owned by all of us in the form of a national park or a national monument, we just sort of looked at each other and said, national parks. And we then began to realize as we explored it how central it was. My number one question in each film is, who are we? Who are these strange and complicated people who like to call themselves Americans? The national park represents us writ in the landscape. I mean, we said it over and over again. This was the Declaration of Independence applied to the landscape. No other country could have invented this idea, an idea now copied by every other country on earth. The idea that land should be set aside not for kings or royalty, but for everybody and for all time. It is our idea, and therefore it represents who we are. So it was a no-brainer, and then 10 years later we were able to share the fruits of that labor, because we had to go from the gates of the Arctics to the dry tortugas off the Florida Keys, from Cadillac Mountain in Maine in Acadia National Park, where the first rays of sunlight hit the United States, to the Hawaii volcanoes, and even out to American Samoa. So, this was a big beat to cover, and we couldn't represent everything, but the story is, I think, a wonderful one, and it wasn't a travelogue or a sort of recommendation of which lodge to stay at. It was, how did this happen? Who were the unique individuals who made it possible, and what's required in terms of vigilance and attention to keep the thing going?
Mm-hmm. And what was your sense of the reaction to the series? You've produced some landmark series for public television over many years now.
The perpetual comment from critics is always, this is terrific, but no one's going to watch it because we have the attention span of gnats. And this is 12 hours on the Civil War, or 18 and a half hours on baseball, or 17 hours in jazz, or 12 hours in the national parks. And 34 million people watched it the first time. And more importantly to me, and to my friend here, they got up off their butts by the millions and went out in the parks the next year and took what had been a declining attendance and hit it back on an upward rising road trajectory, which is what we always hope the American narrative is, a rising road.
Great. So John, from your perspective at the National Park Service, what did the film represent for the National Park Service, both for the visitation and the American public, but also for your employees?
Well, we called it the Burns effect. You probably know the Ken Burns effect. This is the Burns effect, which was the spike we saw in visitation to our national parks as a result of that, and the level of interest in the history of the national park system as well. I think it also really restored, and I wouldn't say we'd lost it, but it gave a great sense of pride within the employees of the National Park Service and our many partners and volunteers that actually provide the opportunity to the public to experience these places, that their mission, their responsibility was recognized and respected by the American people. And to be sort of among the great series that Ken has done, along with, these sort of critical and core pieces of Americana, jazz, baseball, to have national parks right in there, that was very powerful.
And you're known as someone, as a National Park Service director, who's really emphasized education in the national parks, how young people can learn in these places and also online. Why do you feel so strong that the national parks can really become outdoor classrooms?
Well, I think Robin Winks, the Yale historian, said that the national parks are the world's largest university. I think you've said that it's the largest informal education institution in the United States. And I think Dayton once said he learned more about geology from the national parks than he ever learned in the classroom. So, As director, I really made education one of my very top priorities, created the first associate director for education and interpretation, Julia Washburn, who's in the audience here someplace.
There you go.
To really emphasize the role that we play in public education. And it is a core value, and Ken's series actually called that out early on, in that our first director hired professionals to tell the story, women in many cases, to help the public understand what they were looking at. And I think this is an absolute responsibility. And what we want to do in the future is really bring that to a higher scale than we ever have.
And Ken, this is an audience of leading teachers, of course, who are here on a Saturday afternoon. I spent 2 days at this conference. You must have been following some of the changes happening nationally with our nation's schools, the Common Core. What about the teaching of history? What's your sense of where that is? It often takes a back seat to emphasis on language arts and math. What could be done to improve the teaching of history?
Well, I think we did abandon it, and for a long time, sort of the demands for relevancy, I think, distracted us. History migrated into social studies, which migrated into something else, and then we lost a great deal of touch. I remember when I was working on the Civil War series, a majority of graduating high school seniors couldn't correctly identify the half century in which the Civil War, the most important event in our history, took place. We've been anxious in recent years to sort of focus on the STEM, and then there's a sort of counter movement about STEAM, but I think we miss an important thing. None of these work, none of these systems work unless there's glue. Just as the national parks physically stitch us together as a people, so too does our inclusion of not just history, but that very dirty word, civics. Civics is not just 3 branches of government and the judicial system and 535 representatives and senators. It's about how things work. It's politics with a small p, how things get done. And that can be the glue, whether you're STEAM or STEM or anything. And it requires a huge investment in our past and in how we work together. And all of the complaints we have about now, about the lack of bipartisanship, a kind of fractured division, that everything's on a bias of race or sex or politics, comes from the fact that we've forgotten our core value. You know, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. said there's too much pluribus and not enough unum. And what I've been about, what my educational delivery system, public broadcasting, has been about, is trying to change that and to try to say that we have a mission. 2 of those letters are public and service. It's not the public broadcasting system, it's the public broadcasting service. And I've spent my entire professional life there, not because there haven't been better offers elsewhere, but because there's no real better offer in terms of the ability to reach. So today isn't a school day in America, but yesterday was. And the Civil War series and the Lewis and Clark series and the National Park series, all of the films have been shown, many of them hundreds if not thousands of times a day, a portion of it, which means that this kind of visual literacy that our children are being raised on can have a kind of a partner in the work we do that drives them then to books. And every one of our films, we know, has sold books, not just our own, but more importantly, the whole shelf. And that's an important thing, so that when we lament, a visual culture, there are some little islands of sanity, and I think public television is one of them. And our partnership, we sort of felt like we were talking to the same people, that this was an extraordinary kinship between what Stephen Math, or his predecessor, did when he started the National Park Service, because heretofore the parks have been protected by soldiers and ad hoc committees and local citizens, and now it had a structure and folks that were going to be with a single boss. The last one is, this guy has the best job in the world. It's better than mine, and it's better than his ultimate bosses. But it's to communicate the glories that are our shared legacy, and that are these parks.
And John, we talked about the role of the national parks in history, America's most important historic sites, but the parks have a great role to play in STEM, in science education, and in scientific research, if you could talk about that a bit.
Absolutely, and I want to hit the history just for a minute too, though, that you can study the Civil War, but to stand at Little Round Top and look across the cornfield, or to stand at the, this last weekend, oops, lost my voice here. I was at Selma last weekend for the Selma to Montgomery 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights March, and to be there on that bridge and understand both the past and the present as we struggle with civil rights in this nation. There's nothing more powerful than that. On the science side, the Park Service can give you an example of a great program we have called the BioBlitz, where we work with the National Geographic Society, and we bring citizens, and particularly students, to a park and do a 24-hour survey of all of the biota. And a few years ago, we were doing the BioBlitz in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we were out in this meadow, and there was a little stream there, and these students, I think they were 4th or 5th graders, were in the creek, loving that, getting wet, and sort of catching bugs and insects and all kinds of things. And I walked up, and it was a young girl. She had a little vial with a magnifying top on it, and she was looking at it, and I said, "What have you got there?" And she said, "Looks like a chironomid." Okay. So for the non-science teachers out there, a chironomid is a midge, a larvae. I gave her my card and said, "Call me in 10 years. I'll be glad to hire you." So I think that hands-on science, which you can do in the classroom, is very powerful. But hands-on science, in the field, in the park. To stand on the south rim of the Grand Canyon gives you a sense of time that cannot be held or realized in really any other way. So we have a very important role in this.
Mm-hmm. So I love the BioBlitz. It was in the Golden Gate National Parks last spring. So I've been tracking this. And the BioBlitz this year, I think is it in May? Will be in the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park on the Big Island. So any of you teachers who can make your way out there with some students, you can participate. What would be better? Ken, you must have some great stories about how educators, be they teachers or college faculty, are using some of your material. Tell us a few of those.
It's so encouraging and so exciting. I think with the national parks, particularly, to go back to the question you were just asking, John, this begins with a kind of scientific and natural interest. The history is much, much later. When Abraham Lincoln says we are going to save Yosemite in 1864, and then Grant does in the form of a national park in 72, Yellowstone, they're saving places of scientific interest, of natural beauty, and a sense that we have this birth. So it's involved, and it's only later on that we understood that we could expand the role of that to save and preserve, and what is to our ever-loving credit, and John and I have talked about this many times, not just the good stuff. We've got sites of Indian massacres at Washita and Sand Creek. We have Japanese internment camps. Central High School, still a functioning inner city high school in Little Rock, is a National Park Service site that you can visit every day. We've done a really good job of lifting up the rug and exposing all of the American history, and we continue to do that. And so I think what happens in a film like the National Parks or the Civil War is that teachers can use a section of it or two sections of it within a class period and then prompt a whole bunch of discussion. As I said originally, this was not a travelogue. We were interested in how this came about, how each of the central most important parks happened. Who were the individuals who saw? Manifest destiny means we are an extraordinarily acquisitive people. Dayton Duncan likes to say that most Americans look at a river and think dam. Look at a beautiful stand of timber and think board feet. look at a canyon and wonder what mineral wealth can be extracted. And what the national park said was no, there's plenty of land for that, but some things are so spectacular, some things arouse as deeply spiritual as they do political or scientific passions, that we need to save them. It is true, when you stand on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, you are looking, as John Muir said, a scientist and a holy man at a grand geological library. I mean, the Colorado River exposes Precambrian Vishnu schist that is 1.7 billion years old. Every single park is a teaching opportunity. Yep. Every single moment we tried to make in our film was something that would spark an excitement in that.
John, one of the themes of this conference, and Digital Learning Day was yesterday, National Pi Day is today.
3.14.
So this is an audience that actually understands and loves National Pi Day, as opposed to Anderson Cooper.
I thought every day was Pi Day.
Yeah.
Wrong pie.
Oh. Yeah, Anderson Cooper, there was a little report about pi and 3.1415, March 14th, 2015. This will not happen again in our lifetimes. Only in 2115 it'll be National Pi Day. So Anderson Cooper, when listening to this, said, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. So there you go. I'm glad this audience really appreciates that. But John, you were...
Talking about technology?
Yeah, I was going to say, digital learning.
I got it.
Thank you.
So yeah, let me riff on that for a second. You know, it's very interesting when you talk about technology and parks, because there is and I've talked to many audiences, there is a feeling that technology should be left at home when they come to the national parks. And I always like to respond to that saying, so you're still hiking in wool and carrying a wicker pack, that you're using technology in parks today in high performance fabrics and all kinds of things, GPS and others. And so what's wrong with technology in parks? And actually, when I see a photograph of a group of young school kids today standing around a ranger that might be giving a program and is holding in their hand, a box turtle or something that is of interest. All of those kids are holding out their phones and taking a picture of it and uploading it into their social network. And I think that has the opportunity to expand our reach of story within their network. And so I'm actually a believer of embracing the technology within our national parks. There are a few technological challenges of getting that there, though, because and probably not, on the Colorado River, 3 days into your river trip, but certainly on the South Rim or in the visitor centers where you're going to be downloading that kind of information. So I think technology is key. I think some of you know, and maybe from the workshops here, that we've launched our teachers' education portal on the nps.gov website. We now have hundreds of well-designed and curated curriculum materials on everything from civil rights to geology to climate change to plate tectonics. The ones that are there have been reviewed and improved by teachers that have worked directly with us that can access this material. We also have online real live materials or opportunities like the Live Dive program at Channel Islands National Park, where in the classroom you can actually talk to one of our underwater divers that is in the kelp forest of the Channel Islands, or you can have a virtual tour of the Grand Canyon. They actually have a studio that they run in the Grand Canyon where they can do right into your classroom school program as well. So this is an area that I think we're really building and support and the technology to make it work.
Great, and I know you were in Chicago recently with the president to make an important announcement about some new national parks and a new initiative involving young people, so tell us about that.
Sure. I'm gonna have a quiz first. So who out there can tell me what school holiday is directly related to Pullman? I stumped them. Labor Day. There we go, in the back. Okay, so The Pullman site in Chicago was the manufacturer of the Pullman Palace car, which was George Pullman created this fancy rail car, and it came with porters who were, in most cases, either recently freed slaves or the children of slaves. And so they were workers, and he trained them, put them in uniforms, and sent them along with the palace cars. And so there were consequences to this over time, one of which is they essentially created the African American middle class. This was a point of pride and respect and education and a salary that helped create that. The second thing, though, was they were not allowed to unionize. And ultimately, there was an effort to unionize the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. One of the organizers was A. Philip Randolph, one of the early civil rights leaders that worked with Dr. King and ultimately led the civil rights movement in 1960s. And there was a labor revolt there that turned violent and ultimately resulted in the president designating Labor Day as well. So that's a long story. But anyway, we got the president to go there and designate it as a new unit of the National Park System as Pullman National Monument. While he was there, we also got the president to announce the newest initiative called Every Kid in a Park. And this is our effort to get every fourth grader in the nation a field trip to a park in this coming school year. So September to... And we are raising the money philanthropically to support that through our National Park Foundation as transportation grants. We've been doing that for a while, but this is really upping the game to get roughly 4 million kids into parks on field trips. There is an education component to this that Julia and her team are working on. And here's the best part from my standpoint, is that the kids will be able to use a voucher from their education experience to get a pass that is good for them and their family for the full year to all national parks. So I think as teachers, you all know, get it in the backpack, get it home so the parents see it, or guardians or mentors. And so this will give them that opportunity, and that we hope that through that first experience, we get repeat experiences and we build a whole new generation of visitors, of stewards, of constituents, advocates for our national park system. Now, here's the real goal. We want to do this every year for the next 12 years, okay? So that we get every kid in the nation into a national park or another piece of public land for all the benefits.
We've just to follow up on what John's doing, we have convinced PBS to do a second full primetime national broadcast of the park series in 2016 to coincide with the Centennial of the National Park Service's founding. And we had originally focused the direction of our educational outreach, which we fine-tuned for months, if not years, in advance of the release of a film to sort of upper, middle, and high school, to rejigger that and refocus for those fourth graders, so that we hope we can be a pincer movement with John and his efforts to do that. So we're very excited.
Great. It's great.
I'm especially excited because the Pullman Historic District is my old neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. It's where I grew up. And I didn't get a chance to visit it. It was shuttered down when I was a kid growing up. So when the announcement was made, I made it a point to go and read the president's remarks. And it turns out that a great-granddaughter of a Pullman porter is now living in a large white house not far from here. That the First Lady, Michelle Obama's, do I have this right?
Yes.
Great-grandfather was one of the Pullman porters. So some great connections to history, living history. I want to make sure that some of you get a chance to ask some questions of these two distinguished gentlemen, so there'll be a chance to do that. I hope you're thinking, and please line up at the microphones. But again, since this is an audience of educators, I was hoping to ask each of you to reflect on a great teacher or mentor who's been important in your lives. I'll start with Ken.
Well, I think one always has to say, in addition to one's parents. Wanted to be a filmmaker from the time I was 12 years old, and the most significant person was a photography professor that I had at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, named Jerome Liebling. And he transformed my life. I don't recognize the person who entered Hampshire and the person who left it, and that's what a good teacher did. And a good teacher also doesn't just teach in the classroom. A good teacher is, just like the way music works, in the intervals between the notes. So more often than not, I think it was these interstitial moments. We might just be driving to the next town over to Northampton, Massachusetts, and picking something up, and there would be something communicated, something imparted. And I remember the last moment when I was working on my final film project that had been informed. It was a film about Old Sturbridge Village, the Living History Museum in Massachusetts, and it had been informed by his things, but he was now saying he thought something in the editing should go this way, and I sort of pushed back, and he pushed a little bit, and I pushed back again, and the second I pushed back, he just pulled back. And I realized in that great terror that he'd let me go, that I had found my own way. And I thought a good teacher is also knowing exactly when to let that person go, to make sure that they develop their own thing. I had a wonderful history teacher, Russian history teacher in high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, named Randy Peacock, who declared, I'm sure much to the horror of the parents when they got home that night, that he was a Trotskyite, and he was going to tell us about the history of Russia from 1861 when the Tsar freed the serfs to the Russian Revolution. But meanwhile, today, he was going to tell us about the death of Rasputin. 40 minutes later, even the girls who sat in the back of the class drawing pictures of horses had stopped and were gone. And I understood then how valuable story was, even though on the timeline it wasn't. This was the introduction, and nobody didn't pay attention because they thought that Randy Peacock might launch into some other phenomenal story somewhere along the line.
John?
Yeah, well, I grew up in rural Virginia, down near Lexington in the Shenandoah Valley, and a few fans in the audience there. And,
Near Burnsville?
No, I don't know Burnsville. Have to go look for that. For some reason or the other, this small high school often had professors out of Washington Lee University or some of the other colleges in there, VMI and others, would come teach at our high school. And I was a science kid. I loved anything to do with science. And so we had some folks that normally were teaching in the college level, were teaching sciences in our high school. And I had an aptitude for it, so they would dump lots of stuff onto me and also just give me free rein to do experimentation and projects and the like as well, and ultimately led me to have the opportunity to do a college level program when I was only a junior in high school. So that kind of encouragement to pursue this actively and really stretch, I really credit to those folks.
Ken, I'm sure everyone in this audience is eager to hear what's up your sleeve. What's next from Ken Burns and Florentine Films? What can we look forward to?
Well, at the end of this month, the 30th, 31st, and 1st of April, we have a 3-part, 6-hour series called The Story of Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book by the Columbia Presbyterian oncologist Siddhartha Mukherjee. I am the executive producer and co-writer, and a really good filmmaker, Barrett Goodman, was the day-to-day producer and director. Our stuff will follow. Next year is a biography of Jackie Robinson. More often than not, we prefer the hagiographic version, the statue, the perfect thing, or we isolate only the one year that he came up and not see him in the context of a very amazing life. Martin Luther King Jr. said that he was a sit-inner before sit-ins, a freedom rider before freedom rides. And we wanted to to understand in the full glory of that, what that means. I'm also almost done editing a 10-part, 18-hour history on the war in Vietnam, which is just as everything I knew, and I thought I knew something about it, was wrong. And it's going to be very exciting to share that. We're right now spending a lot of time shooting, both Jackie and Vietnam are in the editing room. We're shooting a big history of country music right now and trying to engage as many people in our story as we can. And it's a hugely complicated, wonderful story of an art form that is omnivorous and another way to understand our very complicated 20th century as well as 19th century roots. We're also filming a biography of Ernest Hemingway and have 4 or 5 other mentoring projects where I'm helping other filmmakers, either established or new, work on films. And we've just decided with PBS on what the 2020s will look like. So I know what I'm doing until 2030.
Yeah.
God and funding,
Wow.
God and funding willing, and they're all very, very exciting.
John, we've given people a little peek at what's coming up for the Centennial, but if you could describe more about the exciting things that we can have to look forward to with the 100th anniversary of the national parks.
Thanks, Milton. So, as he mentioned, 2016, August 25th will be the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. And so we began planning for this several years ago, not just as a celebration, which we will celebrate, but celebrate of the past, but really preparing this agency, this institution, this sort of unique responsibility that we have for our second century of stewardship and public engagement. And in many ways, it's all about connecting this next generation. The Park Service hasn't really done this themselves, and Ken knows this since Mission 66, when we really did an outreach in an effort to connect to the returning World War II veterans, and they came, they see the USA in your Chevrolet, and the kids in the back seat really are our base of support today. And we need to do that again. We need to connect to this next generation so that they can find not only themselves, but fall in love with the country all over again. And there's probably no better place than the national parks for that to occur. And so we launch our major public awareness campaign on April 2nd of this year. There'll be a series of events and activities and celebrations and stories and new web presence, and we'll be asking American citizens to share their stories via Instagram and Twitter and all the different kinds of social medias. There will be celebrities, and we've got a big science conference coming up. We're reenacting the Mather Mountain Party. We've got the Rose Bowl Parade. It's just going to be a fantastic next 18 months. So stay tuned. And of course, with the re-release of America's Best Ideas, a big part of that as well. But stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm just wondering, since we've mentioned a lot of projects and things coming up, how can this audience, and I'm sure they're tweeting out information, stay in touch and learn about these announcements? Is it the NPS website or other things?
Well, everything has been planning sort of behind a little bit of a wall, and it all goes live on April the 2nd. I'll be in New York City for the launch, and there'll be over that probably 30 days after April 2nd. Just go to nps.gov. You'll see a connection to places to share your story, to find your park. There'll be a calendar of events. Every park in the system will be having some activities around this, some events, and they're all in planning. We just had the entire team in here as well. And let me just emphasize, this is a big tent. So we're including the state parks, our other public lands, our city parks, and all of this as well. We really want, America to get off the couch and get back outside and reconnect with this estate that they own. But also to connect with the American story. And we want them to re-engage with both our history and our current situation, our current issues as well. As Ken has said so eloquently, this is a nation that has established high ideals, but we are still on that journey. And there is no better place to take a step on that journey than within your national parks.
So before we turn to your questions, I would just like to ask each of you in this group that you're looking out at, 1,000 people, let's say, who are also in touch with many more educators, committed teachers around the country. Is there anything that you would like to ask of them? How can they help you, or how can we help this cause of creating a better democracy?
Well, I think you guys are the front lines. You always have been and you always will. And it's up to John and me to give you the materials that you need to fight those battles on that front line, because we know what the enemy is. We know the kind of entropy that engulfs a society that is focused only on an all-consuming and thereby forgettable present. And we're obligated to set young minds on fire. We're obligated to give them the tools to be distracted from that kind of cult of consumerism that permits you to think that if you just buy the right car or wear the right perfume or jeans, everything's going to be all right. And we know that the inevitable vicissitudes of life intrude on that. And to have a government that you know a little bit about how it works, to have a sense of the rich inheritance which is theirs in the national parks, to understand the complicated, dimensional, diverse history that we have only prepares you for those vicissitudes. And so the question is really, what can we do for you?
John?
Yeah, I think that just to build on Ken's comments is that, look at us as a resource, look at us as an asset and as a partner in this effort. I think all of you have experienced it with your students, that at some point the light goes on and they're suddenly paying attention. And at that moment, their mind is open to learning something about themselves, about this country, about their future. And we know that we can turn that light on. We can turn that light on in these places. And so I think that that's the opportunity that we present to you. And as we've said, we're all in. We're going to scale up. So please come see us.
Great. So please, love to hear your comments, questions, and tell us who you are and where you're from.
My name's Gail Wilson. I'm a teacher in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I had the amazing experience last summer of being a TRT, a Teacher Ranger teacher, out at White Sands National Monument, which was a life-changing experience. I'd recommend it for anyone. I teach in a Title I school. Just about everyone in our school is an English language learner. And I think whoever came up with your idea of letting fourth graders in, I'm a third grader, I work with third graders. Whoever came up with letting fourth graders in next year is brilliant. And I don't know who it was, but I'm glad you went along with it. I came back and they gave me the opportunity at my school to do I call it my special. And they gave me the opportunity to talk to the kids, a third grade classroom every day, every other week, and I've been teaching them about national parks. My first question for them on the first day was, tell me what you know about national parks. Oh, well, let's see, they're Six Flags. There's a park around my house. Our population has no idea about the value, about the treasures that are in our national park. I'm happy to say now that they can tell you about Denali, they can tell you about Yosemite, Yellowstone, all kinds of things, C&O Canal. But I am thrilled that my kids will get a chance next year, and for 12 more years after that, to visit national parks. So thank you very much. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
My name's Tom Snyder. I'm a third grade teacher in Rosemont, Minnesota, and my question's not as good as that, but it has to do with technology in the parks. And my thoughts, videos, I have my own iPhone, I have my own GoPro. Wondering about your stance or position on drones being into the national parks and being used to videotape. Thank you.
Yeah, I issued a ban on all drone activity in the national parks a year ago. I was the first federal agency to issue it long before the FAA has figured it out. We were getting serious incidents right away with drones hovering beside climbers on El Capitan in Yosemite, pursuing wildlife in Zion, and I felt that it was an inappropriate activity, and so I shut it down.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kamala Subramanian. I teach in the Washington, D.C. area. And my question is, I had taken my students to the Environmental Film Festival every year. And last year we were honored to see a film and bio about Dr. Sylvia Earle, who, of course, is out to save the waters, which ultimately saves ourselves. And she had mentioned that she was trying to make, the coral reefs in certain places. I think some place in California has already been designated a national park, And so I was just wondering if is more of that going to be done? I mean, I know that was her hope, and I was wondering, it's been a year since I saw her, but how that's developing into the National Park Service. Is it coming to you? And of course, we're thinking internationally. How does that work? Because my kids were really excited.
Yeah, we have a great relationship with her deepness, as we call Dr. Earle. Love her to death. This president has protected more marine environments than any president in history. He has expanded large zones around the northern Hawaiian Islands, and I think it was in the Post today, expanded the 2 new marine protected areas around the Gulf of Farallones, and then another piece to the north of that on the California coast as well. Some of these designations, it's a little bit complicated about who's actually managing them. It can be the Fish and Wildlife Service, it can be the Park Service, or it can be NOAA as well, but we all work together on increasing. There are world goals around protecting 10% of the ocean, and we're nowhere near that yet, but we are hoping that the United States can be one of the leaders in protecting more of our marine environment, and Sylvia's been fantastic in that.
We're counting down to closing the session, so if we could just have some quick questions or comments, then we'll show a final clip from Ken Burns' series.
Hi, I'm Jay Madsen. I teach a class called American Studies, which is art, architecture, literature. So I'm kind of a poor man's Ken Burns, Or can I say I'm like the live Ken Burns to the kids?
Yes.
But I'm not worthy, sir. Quick question then. I'm just curious your response. Education is a pendulum, educational philosophy. And currently the philosophy is more towards skills and standards. And teaching the class that I do, we sometimes have asked ourselves as teachers, we said, is knowledge then dead? Because we're often pushed to get the kids to be writing about a certain topic in a certain way, thinking in a certain way, inferencing, but there's disdain actually towards learning knowledge. Now, we know that there are some history classes that tend to not be terribly effective because it's too much rote memorization, that type of thing. But we're starting to see a little bit of the negatives of a class that only talks about skills without teaching the basics. And I was curious, just a response.
My experience goes back to, I met an executive from AT&T at the end of the 70s when I was beginning my professional career and trying to raise money, and he had told me how disappointed he was. This was at the beginning of the huge wave of interest in business in the United States and business schools, and he said, none of my MBAs can write a sentence. They can't write a paragraph or a letter. They don't have an understanding of our history. They don't have a sense of moral and ethical dilemmas. I'd rather have a humanist who I can teach the business stuff to a lot quicker than I can teach the humanities to an MBA. And it made a really huge impression on me. And I think what we have to do, the pendulum description is really right, and we have to be very careful of subscribing to one or the other. There is a sweet spot. Of course, you can be overwhelmed with a sense of standards and obligations, and forget something essential, but also we also know what's happened from the lassitude that has crept into our series, the idea that it's all can be individualized. The historian once wrote that you could write a history of Illinois without ever mentioning Abraham Lincoln, which is insane. And we have to strike a balance. And I've tried in my own work to say that we have for too long suffered under the tyranny of a top-down history, that we needed to add a bottom-up one, but we also know the tyranny of that. And what we need is something in the middle. And I think what you guys have to do is struggle to balance and find that sweet spot.
Great. Yes.
Hi, my name is Lori Holtzberry. I'm from Syracuse, New York.
Could you stand a little closer to the mic,
Sorry.
actually?
Oh, there
Thanks.
we go. All right, so I have two questions. One, I love the idea of the parks. Just curious why fourth grade was selected, because I'm so sad for all the people who are in fifth and up. And the second thing is, from a filmmaking standpoint, we have a great deal of people that are not in education that think that they know a great deal about education. And have you ever considered doing a documentary on the complexities of education to educate the public?
Well, you know, I get told every month 200 times what my next film should be. And number one has always been, since the Civil War came out 25 years ago, railroads. The second is a tie between immigration and education. And it's very interesting because I'm a storyteller. This is not necessarily a story as much as it is more a set of kind of, it has a more essayistic, didactic, not in a critical way, composition. And so in some ways I like to shoot back that education is part of every film that I've done. But what you're talking about, the dynamics, is very interesting. One of the projects we have for the 2020s is the history of crime and punishment, which is the same sort of thing. We thought we'd escape the specific gravity of Europe's horrific penal system, and instead we created the worst penal system on earth. And be careful what you wish for. And in many other instances, we've sort of addressed that. Of course, we'll get there. Please be patient. But you're right. You know, it's so in flux, and the problem is that you're being told by people who have no idea what they're talking about or what you do every day.
So let me answer the fourth grade question, because I'm sure that you're not the only one that's wondering why fourth graders, particularly if you're a fifth grade teacher and you don't get to go, right? So we consulted with the Department of Education. Let's say we started with every public school kid. That's where we began, and we realized that was probably a little bit too big of a lift. So we wanted to pick a grade, and we were instructed that fourth grade, number one, often it's the year that they study their state's history. Two, they're often still in homeroom and not moving around as much. And three, when they're 11 or younger, they still listen to an adult.
That's the key. That's the key. You can take them someplace and make them go.
Yes, a couple more quick questions.
Hi, Andres Enriquez, New York City, home of 10 national parks.
Great.
And I'm also on the National Park Education Advisory Committee with Milton. Thank you so much for being here. Quick question, I wanted to tie this question to this morning's session, specifically around issues around diversity and equity, and how are we working to get the National Park Service, the parks themselves, for a much more diverse community. And what can we do with media that's so powerful to actually try to do that?
Well, let me lead off with that and tell you that we were not content, and many of our underwriters were not content when we made the original series, as the case with many of the films we're doing, with just putting out the thing for national broadcast and knowing that it will trickle down and have use segmented in various classrooms, and we design educational material. But we produced a whole slew of ancillary films intended exactly at what you're talking about. And whether it was African American kids from Miami going out to the national park in Biscayne Bay, or it was inner city kids in Las Vegas going out into Death Valley or other places. We made materials to sort of sponsor that. We took one of John's employees, Shelton Johnson, an African American ranger at Yosemite, around the country. He continues to tour, and his first way in is with the Buffalo Soldiers, the original protectors of the park. But he's an amazing, fantastic person. And to be in Hollywood, Florida, with an entirely African American and Hispanic classes, to see Shelton Johnson in his uniform and his hat, and these kids wanted to know at 4th grade how they could get a uniform like that, how they could get a hat like that. And this is how we begin. We've tended in that top-down history to exclude. Now in our new history, we do not. And the Park Service leads the way in that. And just, I ask you, if you've got time before you leave the District of Columbia, to go over to Frederick Douglass's house in Anacostia. You will see one of the original attempts at that. And it's throughout the system, and it's something we should be extraordinarily proud of what our government does. And Milton is absolutely right. You know, you take the military out of the equation for obvious reasons. There's only one government people that we love, and it's these green-suited men and women.
Let me add to this. This has been a mission of mine as the director, is to understand and bring out the story of women and minorities in our existing units of the National Park System, as well as the places that we designate under the National Register of Historic Places or the National Historic Landmarks Program, and then also to establish new areas. So we've launched, since I've been director, 4 theme studies with scholars to identify the history of American Latinos, women, LGBT, and Asian American Pacific Islanders, and their contributions to the American story. And we will be designating new sites. Some new sites have already come out of this process. Cesar Chavez in California is one of those. In the African American experience, Harriet Tubman, Colonel Charles Young, Pullman, Fort Monroe, all of these are incredibly important sites to the Asian American community. Honouliuli, which we just did right after Pullman, the Japanese American internment site on Oahu. All of these are intended to deepen the story and be more representative within the National Park System of the story that we tell.
Do you have something quick you'd like to say? Because I'm looking at the clock and we're out of time.
Really quick, thank you. I'm Johanna Leonard. I teach middle school history and geography. And in the classroom, sometimes you're far removed and you're trying to reach those minds and hearts. So I'd just like to thank y'all for giving words, images, and experiences that help bring that sort of humanity and soul. Somebody said earlier in introducing the panel that teachers help pass along humanity. So thank y'all for giving us the things that we need in order to help do that job. Thank you.
You made my day.
You get the last question.
I'm a special ed teacher in Washington, D.C., and I also teach history in a Title I school. And there are 2 themes that I think are going on, and that's economic conversion in this country. And there's a wonderful Hampshire professor, Mike Clare, who talks about the what for whom questions of prisons versus social services and parks. And I would certainly love to see more coverage of what we're spending on prisons and our footprint in the Middle East, which is current. Thank you for talking about Vietnam, but right now we're stuck in a mess as well. So thank you.
Well, you know, you bring up an interesting thing. The Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament said, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Right. It is often very difficult as Americans, particularly now, to talk about things in a contemporary set that are fraught. And history is a table around which we can still have a conversation. This is the great gift of the national parks. It is the heritage that we are shared. Nobody asks you when you go in what your color is, your sex, your sexual orientation, your race, whether you're red state or blue state. And that's hugely important today. Rachel Maddow and Bill O'Reilly love Abraham Lincoln. genuinely. That's a place to begin. And so Vietnam is actually the story of Afghanistan and Iraq. And it is a place in which, though it is still fraught, because it is recent history with the passions of our current polarization, it is at least have a few of those fuel rods out, and it is possible with history to be a table around which you can still have a civil discourse. And one of the really good reasons to pursue that, and what Ecclesiastes says, is that there's no cycles of history. We're not condemned to repeat what we don't remember, as wonderful as that phrase is. It just means human nature remains the same and superimposes itself on the random events. And by studying those patterns of the past, just patterns, we understand a lot more of where we are now. And it may be, in fact, more valuable to study Vietnam than it is to study immediately Iraq and Afghanistan, because we're right up against it. Someone said journalism is the first rough draft of history. Wonderful phrase, Philip Graham, who owned the Washington Post. But no one turns in a rough draft.
We're going to leave you with some images from Ken Burns' National Park series, but before we do that, let's give them a round of applause for sharing their wisdom and their inspiration today. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.